The story begins with an ancient being reincarnated over and over again. Sometimes he was a fish, sometimes he was an eagle, sometimes he was even an ant walking in a group, and sometimes he was a dinosaur. Just like that, he had lived for tens of thousands of years, millions of years of memories, and the only beings he felt hostility towards were humans. However, his latest rebirth as a human was a significant turning point that brought with it the culmination of all his past lives' experiences and powers. As a human, he somehow was able to control nature and use the powers of the millions of animals he had lived as. The story begins with Lee Jane's latest rebirth as a human, a significant turning point that brings with it the culmination of all his past lives' experiences and powers. As he explored his previous life powers, he got badly injured after getting involved with a group of humans, but he survived due to his survival instincts. As he grows up, Lee Jane questions human behavior and their actions. Though he hated them for killing his past incarnations, his mother made him have second thoughts about humanity's worth. But his peaceful life came to an end when one of the people from that night found him. Lee Jane was branded a spy, and his mother was to be killed as a result. He rushed at home and tried to protect his mother as she was being shot. Lee Jane was confident in his defensive skill, but unfortunately his mother sacrificed herself to protect her son. Lee Jane was enraged, but he ran away in order to live as his mother told him to. The hunters chased after him, but after leaving the village, Lee Jane stopped to massacre the hunters. That day he finally realized his purpose, to drive humanity to extinction. Lee Jane then encountered a hunter who was living alone with his mother. The hunter showed him kindness, but even he died to protect Lee from a rockslide caused by the construction site. Lee Jane, who was still confused about driving humanity to extinction, made up his mind as he killed the people who owned the construction site and the resort. Years went by as Lee Jane lived among nature to explore all of his abilities. He prepares to end humanity but decides to observe them first. As he roamed the human world, he encountered a woman who looked exactly like his dead mother. In the incident, he loses his memories and begins living with the woman. Her name was Alisu. Unknown to Lee Jane and rest of the humanity, in a research facility a special organism was created. Its name was Steer, and though it was created to survive in any condition, it would end up viewing humanity as a threat. One day the Steer was accidentally dropped by a researcher, and through skin contact the Steer transferred its consciousness to that scientist. Later, through mosquito and other physical contact, the Steer continued to spread itself across people's consciousness. As the Steer grew, it became aware of Lee Jane's powers. When Lee Jane confronted the host of the Steer, it summoned other infected humans as well. Seeing this, Lee Jane dragged the host far away and beat it to death. The host kept healing and summoned more infected, but Lee Jane kept overpowering it. The Steer was feeling hopeless in front of Lee Jane's power. But finally, it found his weakness, Alisu. The Steer fled the scene to possess Alisu, but Lee Jane managed to get there in time to rescue her. The Steer kept pressing on as more and more infected people attacked them. Lee Jane escaped with Lisu, but in the process his powers were exposed to the world. As they escaped, Lee Jane noticed a cut on Lisu's arm. He suggested to cut it off, but instead angered Lisu. Lisu was brought to a research facility in order to get examined while Lee Jane met up with the Minister of Defense. The minister told him that the only way to take care of the Steer was to kill the main host, who was Alisu. Jane got angry and tried to break the glass between him and the minister. At that moment, the minister took out a picture from his childhood with his mother. Seeing her brought back Jane's memories. He easily blows a hole in the wall and walks out of there to go rescue Lisu. On his way, he encountered Lisu's friend Dawn. At that moment, they were stopped by the army. But even the army was powerless in front of Lee Jane's rage. He massacred all of them in order to protect Lisu. At the research station, Alisu was slowly feeling Steer's influence over her as the soldiers tried to kill her but failed due to Lee Jane. Jane again massacred the large number of soldiers stationed outside and fled to a deserted cave together with Lisu. Meanwhile, the Minister of Defense killed the president with false accusations in order to obtain control for himself. While staying at the cave, Jane and the steer came to an agreement that Jane would extinct humanity in return for Alisu's freedom. Later they moved to a deserted island in North Korea and continue to live there. While on the mainland, the Minister of Defense, now President, prepares his forces to hunt them down. One night the steer got impatient and decided to act by itself, but it was stopped by Alisu, who got used to the steer living in her body and was now able to control a portion of its powers. She used the steer's connection to keep people away from the deserted island in order to protect Lee Jane. Back at North Korea, a girl was being pursued by the local military. She managed to escape in order to avoid becoming a public servant and ended up at the same island as Jane and Lisu. The girl saw them as threats and tried to eliminate both of them, but she was ultimately overpowered by both of their abilities and surrendered. Things became quiet as the girl surrendered, but unknown to them, the military were able to use the satellite to pinpoint their location. The minister contacted North Korea's general and managed to get their cooperation in order to capture Jane. At dawn, Jane sensed the people who were approaching the deserted island on boats. Jane created whirlpools and killed all the soldiers. One of them managed to survive and reported back to his superiors. Things became serious as the Air Force was deployed, but even they were no match for Jane. Drones, bombs, missiles were deployed, but everything failed. Seeing no other option, the general decided to work together with China to hunt the monster. China sent out their warships and jets to attack the island. Feeling pressured, Jane decided to call for help from the aquatic life and birds, who quickly overpowered the army. Even in the face of such challenge, the army tried to push forward, but what they saw next struck them with true fear. A massive kraken emerged from the sea and destroyed the entire fleet in seconds. The people who were watching the live stream were all speechless. A few days later, the Baekdu mountain volcano erupted. Due to the wind gust released by Jane, the volcanic ash rushed towards Seoul, where Alisu's friend was staying. Jane bid farewell to the kraken and decided to make his way to Seoul along with Lisu and the young girl. Just as they were about to depart, Lee Jane's powers weren't activating. Seeing this opportunity, the steer took control of Lisu and the girl and attacked Jane, who was unable to defend himself. The kraken tried to attack Lisu, but Jane stopped it. The steer felt disappointed seeing him so weak and told Jane that he lost his powers because he gave up on his true purpose, humanity's extinction. The steer left the island as Jane was left to watch. Having lost his powers, Jane felt lost at first, but thanks to the young girl, he strengthened his resolve and slowly recovered his powers. Back in Seoul, protests broke out as people were concerned about the kraken they saw. The steer made its way into the president's chamber and took control of the minister, in order to make Korea an enemy for the world. Seoul was bombed as the steer watched and laughed as the city burned. Jane arrived at the cafe run by Lisu's friend and explained the situation to her as they went to Lesu. On their way, they were stopped by soldiers controlled by the steer. The attack became stronger as the steer found out about Jane recovering his powers. During the attack, one of the soldiers pointed his gun at the young girl, and while protecting her, Jane almost lost his life. Jane was restrained and put in a coffin for transportation. While he hung between life and death, Jane thought about the purpose of his existence. Few minutes later, Jane finally found his answer and woke up. The steer commanded the soldiers to shoot, but this time the bullets didn't work on him. Tanks and air forces arrived, but only to be utterly demolished by Jane. Jane made his way to the steer while subduing the soldiers. As more resistance were thrown at them, Jane was slowly reaching his limit. After destroying a huge army of tanks and soldiers, Jane finally reached Alisu. As they confronted each other, the steer tried to threaten Jane with Lisu's life, but Jane had already prepared himself to kill her. Seeing this, the steer called on to a horde of infected people, but instead of attacking, they transferred their strength to the steer. Jane tried to stop her, but he was immediately overpowered. The steer attacked Jane with all its might, but Jane was forced to be on the defense in order to not hurt Lisu's consciousness. As Jane countered the attacks, the steer grew impatient and called more people to absorb their powers. Lisu's consciousness was slowly fading as the steer grew stronger. Seeing no other option, Jane confronted the steer. He started gathering his strength to finish things with one attack, but the steer tried to stop him. Seeing as its attack had no effect, the steer called even more people to absorb. Among those people were Dawn and Okja. Due to this, Lisu's consciousness resisted when the steer tried to absorb their life force. Seeing no other option, the steer commanded the people to attack Jane and ran away. While running, she controlled the leaders of other nations to launch nukes at the city. Discord arises between the people of other nation as the leaders launched a nuke attack. The steer fled the town as fast as possible while Jane used his stored power to cure the infected people. Then in the blink of an eye, Jane goes over to the steer and grabs its face. As he begins to cure the steer, Jane finds out about the nuke headed to Korea. He is forced to leave the steer in order to intercept the nuke with the Kraken. Jane blew a hole through the jet carrying the nuke, but unfortunately he got caught up in the explosion. In the aftermath, the steer found the burnt body of Jane along with the Kraken's dead body. The steer ran its hand into Jane's body in order to finish him off. Jane started to heal his body, which made the steer attack him continuously. At that moment, Lisu transferred her consciousness to Jane's body and completely healed him. Jane, now fully healed and with his full powers, punched the steer back to the shore. The steer was beat up until it showed its full power as well, but Jane remained unfazed. The world watched through the drone, the battle for the sake of humanity's existence. Both sides beat each other up with all they had. The steer then focused its power in one hand and ran it through Jane's body, thinking that it was over. However, Jane suddenly grabbed hold of the steer and forcefully injected Alisu's consciousness back in her body while curing it. The steer slowly lost its consciousness and faded away. When Alisu woke up, she saw Jane's cold, lifeless body. He sacrificed his own life in order to protect her. And that is all for now. Let us know if you want more recaps on this or any other manhwa. Hit the like button once if you enjoyed the video and twice if you didn't.